Greetings again, most excellent people. Time for yet another update on the Ukrainian unraveling here, February 17th, 2015. Actually, I haven't done an update on this particular subject since March of 2014, and almost exactly a year ago. And boy, a lot has happened since then. But I'm going to entitle this specific podcast for this update about Ukraine, Putin Can't Lose and Russia Can't Win. Now, I thought this was about the Ukraine. You talking about Vladimir Putin? Putin can't lose, Russia can't win. Yes, I think it's a pretty heavy podcast. Let me lay it on you right now, starting with the rundown of what's happened in Ukraine since March 2014. Continued unraveling update alert here. And this has come into the public eye again because there's been some peace talks, an attempted peace negotiation, and a peace settlement of a meeting that went down in Belarus just last week between French President Hollande, the German Chancellor Merkel, and Vladimir Putin, who was in attendance, along with the current president of Ukraine, Poroshenko. So there was high hopes that they're going to have a ceasefire because this has been a bloodbath and it's turning into kind of like a new Cold War between East and West for no good reason. It's just been an absolute and utter mess. But let me catch you up. That's why it's back in the public eye, and not much has come of that peace negotiation from last week. But what's happened since last year that's called for a peace negotiation here a year later? Since my post last March 2014, the Crimean Peninsula reverted to Russian control. The official annexation was 21 March 2014, wherein the Russians, who had done a stealth invasion of the Ukraine by supplying arms and unmarked soldiers in uniforms but had no markings, helped secure and then run a poll, a referendum for the people of the people of Crimean Peninsula to vote on their independence and a rejoining of Russia, which they overwhelmingly and resounded voted for. This referendum, was not recognized by Ukraine and not really anybody else on planet Earth except the Russians, which is fine because that's what everybody expected anyway. Now, so Crimean Peninsula is officially back in Russian hands. It doesn't matter if anyone else in the world recognizes it. You know, Boyer, I'm just going to tell you the truth. It doesn't matter if anybody else recognizes it. The Russians can defend it. They will defend it. It is part of Russia. It's a fact. It just is. The rest of the world got pissed off by this, obviously, and condemned the Russian move. The Russians, on their part, under Vladimir Putin's leadership, see themselves as liberators. And Vladimir Putin can honestly and openly say, what are you talking about? This place used to be Russian territory. True fact. We may or may not have done anything in this place. True fact. Could you say may or may not? That includes all options. And the people of this place overwhelmingly voted on this referendum in a democratic process to rejoin Russia. That's a true fact. So whether it was a fair election, it's of no consequence. They could have had international observers in there, and the overwhelming majority of the Crimeans would have voted to rejoin Russia because they are, in fact, the majority pro-Russian and or ethnically Russian to begin with. So that would have happened either way. The Russians feel like they did a good deed, and it didn't hurt them strategically either. Okay, that happened March 21st. The world responded with saying, we don't buy this. Russia is being an aggressor here, and therefore we're going to enact sanctions led by the United States, sanctions of the U.S. and America, the European sanctions against Russian rulers, the Russian aristocracy, the Russian elite, Russian business leaders, I suppose. When this happened a year ago, I remember Vladimir Putin and all of his ilk were dying laughing. They publicly were like, we don't care. Oh, you're going to freeze our bank accounts. We don't have any there. Oh, you're not going to let us do business with you. We don't care. They publicly flaunted they didn't care about it. But lo and behold, over the course of the last 11 months, those sanctions have taken a pinch. And the Russian economy has gone south. Not just due to the sanctions, but I'll get back to that by the end of this podcast. Lots of other things have been helping Russia to not do so good. The sanctions certainly haven't helped. But let's get back to the Ukraine. The move in Crimea basically encouraged the same sort of geostrategic power play in other parts of Ukraine, namely eastern Ukraine. Much like the Crimean Peninsula, Eastern Ukraine has big sections of their population which count themselves as ethnically Russian and or Russian speakers and or sympathetic to rejoining Russia. The further east you go in Ukraine, the more Russian it gets, because here's an insider tip: it used to be part of Russia. This is a oft overlooked fact by most of the world press, but virtually all of the country we call Ukraine in today's world 500 years ago was Russia. Some of the old capitals of the Russian Empire were in what's now modern-day Ukraine. So there's a long historical, ethnical, linguistic story here. I'm not defending the Russian moves. I'm certainly not defending Vladimir Putin because he can defend himself with judo. But there's something to it. And the Russian people, and the Russian mind, and this part of the planet is part of the Russian storyline. So when the Crimean Peninsula was reabsorbed back into Russia, other ethnically Russian people or pro-Russian people in eastern Ukraine started to rise up saying, we want a referendum, we're going to have protests, we want to rejoin Russia, and we might actually take up arms to defeat the Ukrainian army to do just that and declare separate states, which then will vote to rejoin Russia. Specifically, the places I want you to know about are Donetsk and the Luhansk Oblast of Ukraine. Oblast, you can convert that to the word state. So like there's 50 states in the United States. Donetsk and Luhansk are the two easternmost states of Ukraine. And that is where the overwhelming majority of the violence, protest, uprisings, and intervention by Russian forces has happened. So when these protests started, of course, the Ukrainian government sent in the Ukrainian army to try to quell this unrest and keep the rest of the state together. And I can kind of summarize now. It hasn't really worked for most of the last 10 to 11 months. There's been sporadic and or completely open violence between Ukrainian army and these protesters. Certainly the Russians have supplied money, arms, propaganda, perhaps even Russian soldiers to these pro-Russian separatists in the east. And again, I said it's mostly in the states of Donetsk and Luhansk. You probably heard a lot in the news about the Donetsk airport. That's a scene of constant siege between the rebels now. The pro-Russian rebels hold their airport. No, the Ukrainian army took back the Donetsk airport, so it's a big deal. Again, all this is over in the east. It's collectively referred to as the war in Donbass. Donbass. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. Don, like a dude named Don, and Bass, like the fish, but one word. Donbass region. And this is collectively the Donetsk and Luhansk states together. Donbass actually has historic reference as this kind of a center stronghold of Russia's, I don't know, culture or power within this part of Europe. So again, there's history here. This isn't a new phenomenon that Vladimir Putin's running in to take over this part of the planet. So most of last year, there's been covert Russian forces and arms coming in from the east into these two regions, two states, the Donbass region, fighting between pro-Russian separatists and the Ukrainian army, which has resulted in 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 dead. All the reports are all sketched depending on who you're getting the numbers from. This actually came to a head, became even more hot on the 17th of July. Does anybody remember hearing about a Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 that was shot down in Donbass, over the Donbass region? It's a commercial air flight. It had nothing to do with anything on the ground in Ukraine, but somebody shot it down. And now I'm going to... Okay, I just got to tell you my personal opinion. To me, obviously, it's some pro-Russian rebels / separatist irregulars, some folks that had their hands on some weaponry that they didn't quite know how to use, some weaponry that was significant enough to shoot down a jet in high airspace. So most of the world saw this in July and said, oh my God, this is Russia, hello, the pro-Russian separatists you're arming have just shot down a commercial airliner and killed a whole bunch of people who ain't from Ukraine nor Russia. Russia, for its part, and all of the Russian population, and I can assure you, every single human in Russia, okay, 95% of them, believe that, nope, the Ukrainian army shot down the jet intentionally to embarrass Russia. By the way, BTW, insider tip, 95% of Russian people do not believe that the Russian government has done anything in Ukraine. Do not believe there's any Russian troops in Ukraine. Do not believe Russia's sent any weapons to any rebels in Ukraine. And therefore, when this jet got shot down, the Russian people said, hey, what? Obviously, it wasn't Russia. And any attempt to suggest it was is further propaganda proof that the West is out to get us. This is obviously, in fact, I believe that the press story in Russia that got the most play, that most people believe, is that there were eyewitnesses, there were pro-Russian separatist eyewitnesses through binoculars who saw Ukrainian military jets who went and shot down this airliner intentionally. And there's just really no proof of that. They already have identified the type of weapon that brought this plane down, and so it's just a mess. It's a he said, she said. Both sides believe the other side did it. But that, again, galvanized further world support to end this conflict and world support that Russia's really playing the bad guy here. I'm being balanced. I'm not suggesting that. But that bringing down that jet galvanized support that Russia's helping these rebels is really bad news. And again, Russia completely and 100% denies it. Most of its people believe that. Okay. So further sanctions ensued after the Malaysian Airlines incident. And then the next thing that happened was between the 22nd and 25th of August, again, we're floating through the whole year here, there was certainly, through all military accounts and people that didn't gather intelligence, again, I'm not making fun of the Russian people. Any Russian person who sees this believes that I'm a tool, a propaganda tool of the West too, and that's fine. We all have to just speak from what we believe and think. And so by all accounts, from military intelligence from all over the place, from the 22nd to about the 25th of August of 2014, there's been a stealth invasion by Russian forces under cover of humanitarian aid sometimes. The Russians said, hey, we're going to go ahead and help these poor Ukrainians, pro-Russian Ukrainians who are getting bombarded and killed by the government of Ukraine. So we're sending in aid. The whole world was like, dude, you guys can't do that. And Russia said, we're going to do anything we want to, and so we're going to send in this aid. And probably at the same time, there were probably weapons floating in across the border, which has been happening anyway. And up to at this point, there may be 7,000, up to 7,000 Russian army soldiers in Ukraine, all denied by Russia, of course. 100% denial. No, there's not. There's nobody there. Maybe, and this is more accepted even by the Russian government, maybe 30,000, maybe 40,000, maybe 50,000 Russian troops massed on the border. So a significant show of force waiting on the border were Ukraine to do something Russia really doesn't like. And very likely Russian regulars, unmarked, with no Russian military insignia on them, very likely Russian military folks inside of these oblasts over in eastern Ukraine, organizing, helping the rebels, maybe even leading the military charge altogether. It's hard to tell. If you haven't picked this up yet, everybody's in denial of everything. Russia says we're not doing any of this. It's made up by the West. The West says, of course you're doing all this, and everything you're saying is made up. This is why it's just such a pickle everybody's in, is nobody will admit to anything, and everybody says it's the other side's fault. No matter what happens, both sides say it's the other side's fault. So the continued fighting, it's their fault. Civilians getting killed, their fault. Malaysian Airlines being brought down, their fault. And both sides are spinning it hardcore. It's the other side's fault. We're here to help. It's the other side's fault. Everybody's saying that. There was a ceasefire in September that was orchestrated by several parties, mostly Europeans. Vladimir Putin did not attend that one. That ceasefire collapsed in early January, just last month. Everybody, and it never was really fully on. People were still attacking other people, and the airport was under siege at multiple times. So the ceasefire that was enacted in September was kind of a joke, and it completely collapsed last month. And heavier fight ensued. All of this mess, everything we're talking about, and all of the peace accords that have been attempted to so far, one just last week, have amounted to anything. And this catastrophic, completely man-made mess in eastern Ukraine has resulted in lowball 1,000 civilian deaths. I'd say 1,000 deaths, probably mostly civilian. Highball 5,000. Again, it depends on your source. Somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 people have been killed. Somewhere between 100,000 and 750,000 refugees have hauled ass out of here. So internal displacement refugees. They probably either went across the border into Russia or maybe stayed within Ukraine and just have tried to get out of this war zone. So an utter catastrophe. And on top of the human suffering here, we have this east versus west rift that is widened and threatens the stability of the entire continent. And for what? No one can quite figure that out. Now, let's get to the crux of the title of this podcast. Putin can't lose and Russia can't win. What am I suggesting here? What I'm trying to impart here is Vladimir Putin, who I have touted as hilariously awesome for years and still have quite a bit of respect for him. He cannot lose in this current situation. This battle for Ukraine. Putin comes out a winner no matter what. And what do I mean by that? Well, what Putin has done is by using this kind of extremist rhetoric in the fight for Ukraine, has really, and supplying troops, maybe, and supplying weapons, maybe, but certainly being a very strong arm player in all of this, suggesting that we just want to help Ukraine and we're going to protect Russian citizens. Remember that from previous podcasts. He says, hey, I'm protecting Russian people, not just Russian citizens, and those Russian people are all over the place, including eastern Ukraine, and I'm not going to let Russian people get picked on. And maybe that means a collapse of Ukraine, but I'm protecting Russian people. Going old school sovereignty, like 1,000-year-old old school sovereignty, not modern sovereignty, old school, protecting people, not my political unit. And what he's done by being this bold new face and protecting Russian people in the face of disintegration of Ukraine is that he's really tapped into kind of Russian angst. The Russian people wildly support him. They had even before this, although from time to time his popularity wanes. But they're all on board right now. And again, I always over-exaggerate, but you got 80, 85, 90% of Russians who are pro-Putin, pro-Russia. Anything this guy says is fact. Anything he suggests should happen. And it's very rare this happens in world history, in political history, but he controls the spirit of the state. Yes, he controls the media too, and he controls the propaganda, but he controls the spirit of the state, meaning the people don't even care if it's propaganda. They don't even care what's right or wrong. They don't care if it's true or fiction. The people will support him no matter what. And so, and that's because he's tapped into this feeling of, not desperation, but this angst of losing the Cold War, of a calamitous decade in the 1990s where Russia just crashed and burned. Their economy completely sucked. They were just sidelined in world history. They weren't a world power anymore. They weren't a player. And, that weighs heavily on the peoples. And that has weighed heavily on Russians. And for the first decade of Putin rule, I said, well, Putin's really awesome because he got their mojo back, got their self-respect back. But now he's tapped into it at a different level. And he's used that tapping into the angst of the Russian people to really be like, yes, we're now flexing our muscle. We're not just back. He, using this situation, has restored Russian national pride. He restored the economy from 2000 to 2010. Now he's restoring Russian pride. He's restoring Russian influence, not in Russia, in the world, and certainly in the periphery around Russia. The periphery means the areas right next door to you. So areas that Russia either historically owned outright or that were part of the Soviet bloc during the Cold War, he is re-exerting Russian influence back into these zones, which again the Russians would say, this is very natural. These are areas we are used to having influence in. So he's restoring that Russian influence, and he's countering Western influence and Western ideals in areas that, again, used to be part of the Soviet Union or used to be part of Russian influence, Russia's near abroad, as it were. So he's pushing back Western idealism and Western political philosophy and Western liberal anything in favor of a more kind of conservative, state-centered, strongman approach, which is very typical for most of Russian history. And actually, it's very typical for Eastern European history. So this, to me, if you know what's going on, you follow history, this is no huge surprise. In Putin's mind, he has a point. He's restoring the proper order to the Eurasian continent that classically Russia has held in its country and its near abroad, in the periphery around Russia. He said, hey, the catastrophe that's the European Union right now, and liberal democracy, and letting people express themselves any way they want, and focus on individual human rights over the state, we don't dig that. And we're going to take it back to the way that it used to be in Russia, whether it was Stalinist Russia or Tsarist Russia or even communist Russia. State-centered, not individual focused. And so he's really pushing back, successfully pushing back on Western ideology in this sense. And again, restoring Russia's classic position of a power center within Eurasia and the world. He has a point. Again, he has a point. This area of eastern Ukraine that's being fought over and other areas, okay, is historically a Russian area. Again, looking back at different parts of history, Ukraine was Russia. Russia was Ukraine. Either outright or was part of the USSR. These are mostly ethnically Russian peoples in these contested areas. And again, if you went back 1,000 years ago, the leader's job was to protect the peoples, not the place, protect the peoples. And to get more modern, Putin is looking at this in terms of he and his ilk have been extremely bothered by what they consider NATO encroachment. EU encroachment, the European Union growing and getting closer to its borders, yeah, that may bug them a little bit. It's been the NATO encroachment that has bugged Putin since before he even became president of the damn country 15 years ago. And this is because during the 1990s, for those of you who have taken my class, you know this already, during the 1990s when Russia was in total chaos, is when there was kind of a gentleman's agreement. Now that's a sexist term, but let's just stay with it for now. Kind of a gentleman's agreement between these powers. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the people in charge of Russia and these other states and the Europeans and the Americans kind of said, okay, here's the deal. Russia said, look, we're collapsing. We're going to let these Eastern European states go. But can we all agree that there's no need for NATO anymore, so you don't need to grow it because we would consider that a threat if you keep growing up to our borders. And the heads of NATO and the Americans and most Europeans, I guess, at these meetings at the time, they said, they didn't write it down, that's why it's a gentleman's agreement, it was just spoken, it was understood that NATO wouldn't expand because there'd be no need for that because the Cold War was over and the Soviet Union was no more. Then enter the 1990s where the NATO actually completely grew and did exactly the opposite of what the gentleman's agreement was. And thus Vladimir Putin and people like him have been very bothered by this for 20 years, my friends, 2 decades. They've been very bothered by what they consider encirclement by NATO forces that used to be hostile to them during the whole Cold War, right up to their borders, especially in Estonia and Latvia, that share a direct border with Russia, much less Ukraine, which was flirting with the idea of joining NATO. Are you starting to see Vladimir Putin's point? Again, I'm defending him a little bit here. He looks at all this and says, was ist das? Actually, that's German. But he says, we agreed to this. We consider this a threat. What you guys are doing is a threat. Growing NATO to our borders is a threat. Letting them, all these countries in the EU, is pulling them away from us economically and ideologically. And we can live with that maybe, but militarily we can't live with you guys encroaching all the way up to our borders. And then you're talking about letting Ukraine in, a state that used to be part of our state that has ethnically Russian people in it. We cannot accept them becoming part of NATO. I get it. I see his point. Do you? I don't have to say he's a great guy, but I get it. And thus, I get why Vladimir Putin is, in this Ukrainian situation, being a bit of a strong arm because he is restoring Russia's place in his mind and the Russian people's mind. He is restoring their honor. He's restoring their security. He is restoring their position as a serious world power that has to be reckoned with no real international challengers. And isn't that the case in all of this mess? Because in the peace agreement, or the peace negotiations in Belarus last week, this is also why it made the news. U.S. President Barack Obama was saying, hey, we're mulling over the idea of giving significant lethal force to the Ukrainian army in order to repel the Russians. And Vladimir Putin's like, yeah, see? See, this is exactly what we're talking about. The Americans are coming to get us. The Europeans, they want to beat back Russia. They want to kill Russia. All of this supports his argument. BTW, side note, insider tip, part 2. Angela Merkel, my most favoritist, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, but there was a news story that came out that said, don't bother trying to scare Putin with that. I was almost a direct quote. She's like, no, don't bother. You're not going to scare him with that. Do you really think this man is going to be intimidated by you providing weapons to the other side? What that's likely to do is give him more incentive to use heavy weaponry against Ukrainian army. So he is coming from a position of history and culture and ideology that's different from the West and sees Ukraine as a battle worth fighting. And that's why it's gotten so hot. He can't lose, okay? Anything that happens strengthens his position. He has control of the Russian press, control of the Russian propaganda machine. And yes, you will see some stories come out in some Russian newspapers that are semi-critical of the Putin regime. They're allowed to be semi-critical. It's mostly controlled, and this is not dissing Russian press. I'm not making fun of you. You just have to be honest, okay? The government controls the press in Russia. They control the information Russians get. Overwhelmingly, the Russians support the Russian government and Vladimir Putin specifically in anything they want to do. So he is at a unique position of being a world leader that can literally start a war and do anything and will have almost 100% public support. That makes this a more volatile situation. And he's not afraid to use force. He's already done this in Georgia, for those of you that took my class and knew about the 2008 Georgia invasion. And they've already taken the Crimean Peninsula. And I say they've taken. Again, let me try to be more balanced and say Russia intervened in Georgia to protect some Russian citizens. Russia intervened in Crimean Peninsula and oversaw a referendum in which the people voted to rejoin Russia, and they reabsorbed it. That's the politically correct way of phrasing it, and I don't have any problem with it either way. The results are the same. But here's my problem that I want to finish with. Putin can't lose. He can't. If NATO beefs up troops in Eastern Europe, which they have, Putin can go to his people and say, look, I told you, they're trying to surround us. If they try to arm or better equip, if outside forces try to arm or better equip the Ukrainian army, Putin goes to his people and says, look, they're going in to kill Russian people. I told you, America's trying to kill us. And they truly do believe this too, by the way. I don't know if Vladimir personally believes it, but the propaganda in Russia is all of this Ukrainian mess is a project hatched by the CIA in America. America wants to discredit and disarm, surround, and punish and cripple Russia. All Russians, I keep saying all, the overwhelming majority of Russians truly believe the whole Ukrainian thing is completely and utterly sponsored by the U.S. and possibly NATO. They believe it. They'll go to their deaths believing it. You're not going to convince them of otherwise. Why try? I'm not going to try. I'm not going to bother. I don't personally believe that, but most Russians do. So any NATO moves to strengthen their NATO allies in Eastern Europe will reinforce Putin's power. Any move by the United States or NATO to help Ukrainian army reinforces Putin's power. The Ukrainians themselves attacking and winning and beating up or killing any Russian soldiers in eastern Ukraine strengthens Putin's position and power. He can't lose. There's nothing that could happen that doesn't make him more powerful and make him look like more of a hero in Russia and possibly the wider region, because do remember, there are Russian, ethnically Russian people in all Eastern European states and Central Asian states as well. So he is looked upon as a leader and a salvation force for most of these folks. Let me go ahead and give you another side note before I get to why Russia can't win here. And that is the place to start watching with some trepidation and worry is a place like Estonia. And that's because Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania became NATO members. Therefore, NATO can put troops there, and therefore they have, in response to this much more aggressive and outspoken Russia, much more confident Russia. Let's call it that. And so NATO has responded in kind. They've increased maneuvers, NATO patrols, and NATO military exercises in the Baltic Sea off the coast of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. I think they probably increased presence in the Black Sea. So no surprises here. Russia has taken this as, oh, see, you're feeding the beast here. You're feeding the beast. NATO's doing more stuff, so we're going to have to do more stuff. And why do I pick on Estonia as a place to watch in particular? Because Estonia has a significant minority population of ethnic Russians. And Estonia has not had the best relationship with Russia, ever. Actually, when I was in Estonia, they have a museum, a very nice museum, called the Museum of Russian Occupation. They have never gotten along well with Russians. They've always felt like a dominated power. And so when they became a free state, they were like, please let us join NATO, please. Because we don't want to be Russian again, and we're going to do anything we can to beat the hell out of them and push them out of here. They even outlawed the Russian language at one point. Said, no, you can't teach Russian in our schools. So there's already friction between the Russian minority and the Estonian majority in that country, and they're a NATO member. So the problem with that, why it's one to watch, is that could be a hot button issue. That could be a powder keg. If Russian minority folks in Estonia start protesting and start saying, we're being picked on, hey, Vladimir Putin, you said you were going to save all the Russian people, that could get hot fast because it's a NATO country with NATO people there, and Vladimir Putin could easily say, I'm going to test NATO and see what their resolve is. He could break the back of NATO if he says, I'm going to go in and do the same thing in Estonia that I'm doing in Ukraine. He could test the metal and say, hey, do you guys want to start World War III? Because I'm sending in Russian troops across the Estonian border to protect Russian people. I dare you to do something. And if NATO does not respond, then NATO's done. And that may be another thing that Vladimir Putin's Russia is pushing against. Test NATO. We are already pushing against Western ideology with politics. Let's push against their military and see what they'll do as well. So I fear that Estonia may be the start of World War III, because if Vladimir Putin were to do that, and NATO Article 5 says NATO's got to step up, well, then you got World War III. Nobody really wants that, but it could be a huge game of chicken that we don't want to see the actual result of. But I'm already 10 minutes over, so let me finish with this. Vladimir Putin can't lose. Can't lose! He won't lose eastern Ukraine. If he wants to take it, he could. He's got 50,000 troops there. He may not want it, though. More that it could be just a bargaining chip, and if that's what he wants, that's what he's going to get. Whatever Putin wants to do, he can do. He can't lose. Any moves against him support his general concept that the West is out to crush Russia, and he will get more support from within Russia. And by the way, militarily, they can't lose either. They are the dominant military force, and they're a nuclear power, something that Vladimir Putin himself pointed out last week. He was like, oh, by the way, all these Western forces that are putting sanctions on us and hating on us, and you think you're going to supply the Ukrainian military? BTW, we have got more nuclear bombs than anybody. True fact. But let me finish on why Putin can't lose, Russia can't win. And I'll try to go through these fast since we're already now 100 minutes over. Russia can't win this game. And I actually can't comprehend what they're thinking of, because I give Vladimir Putin and his group a lot of credit for being really smart people. They can't win in the long run. Let me fire you off some facts. Since all this mess has started, Russia was expelled from the G8. Yeah, whatever. So it's back to the G7. Vladimir Putin laughed about that too. More importantly, though, this is a symbolic gesture. And this symbolic gesture is basically saying Putin's Russia is irrevocably and perhaps permanently now split from the West. Team West and Russia are now on worse relations than before the freaking Cold War started. Or during the height of the Cold War, they weren't on this bad of relationship. And so this is like a irrevocable split now of, well, we're never going to deal with you guys, which means, and I've been saying this for years, for those that have attended my class even a decade ago, that it's always been my instinct that Vladimir Putin's been wanting to turn Russia to face the rest of Asia more, to deal with China and Japan and Southeast Asia and do business with them. And to me, this is the split. The divorce is over. A divorce is finalized now. They're like, nope, never deal. We don't like the West. We're never dealing with them. That's fine, but that's not a really good long-term strategy. Europe still is rich. Europe still buys lots of stuff. Europe still sells lots of stuff. And so, to me, it seems fairly short-sighted to say, oh, we don't like you guys on an ideological level, so we're going to never deal with you ever for anything, that we can get away with it. Okay, well, Russia's economy is not doing that good, so not a good long-term move in my opinion, and let's get to that. Economically, Russia's suffering right now. The sanctions, which are only against the rich and famous of Russia, don't hurt most ordinary Russians, but they are starting to pinch the economy because sanctions include telling businesses in your countries you can't invest in Russia. It's against our laws now. So Microsoft, you were going to start a business in Russia? No, you can't do that. We got sanctions against them. So you're hurting the rich people, but you're having a trickle-down effect on the Russian economy, which is now starting to take hold 11 months later. On top of that, everybody's scrambling to figure out how to get away from their heavy energy reliance on Russia due to the very instability that Russia is creating over this Ukrainian situation. So Russia supplies 1/3 of Europe with its natural gas, and guess who's trying to not do that? All of Europe, who's now looking around saying, okay, maybe we better get serious about alternative energies and other sources of energies because Russia could cut off the tap on us at any time as a political retribution, and that's true. So you could see a lessening reliance on Russian energy. It seems impossible, but hell, you never know. If I was in Eastern Europe or even Western European economy, I'd be doing everything in my power to not be relying on Russia. Why would you? That's a foolish long-term and short-term move for a European country. Russia could get pissed off tomorrow and say, we're not selling you guys gas, or it's 3 times the price. So moving away from reliance on Russia's natural commodities, which is the only thing Russia's got. And that brings back up a podcast I did not too long ago about the effects of the lowered oil prices worldwide. Prices of oil have dumped in the last exact year. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences. I think that the Western powers, the U.S. as a leader, but Europeans have encouraged their allies, including Saudi Arabia, to do everything all together we can to dump the price of oil as low as it can go because it immediately cuts the juggler of the Russian economy, and it has. Russian government coffers have been not empty, but they're taking a hit on top of the sanctions, on top of maybe European powers trying to lessen reliance forever on Russian oil and natural gas. Russian oil and natural gas is the lifeline for the Russian economy, and it has gotten beaten to hell for the last 11 months. And that's helped what has just happened in the last couple months of the ruble, the Russian currency, virtually collapsing. That sounds like an extremist word, but that's the way they're describing it. Only one currency, I think, on planet Earth has fared worse than the Russian ruble in the last year. I don't even know what that currency is. It's probably trading seashells in some Caribbean country somewhere. I don't know. So the ruble has been crashing. And you put all these together, sanctions, the ruble crashing, the glut of oil, the crippling effect of loss of revenue. You put all these things together, and there's been foreign capital flight out of Russia too. So international companies are like, oh, I'm not investing there. Their currency's barely stable, and the price of oil's... And the Russian government's not friendly to any of us Western companies. Who the hell's going to invest in that climate? Again, Vladimir Putin, I believe, and his peeps, smart peeps, all of them, they are basically saying, we don't care about any of that. We're going to focus on encouraging Asian investment. And so some of that probably has been coming in. China doesn't care about any of this mess. China will invest. But you got to, again, think bigger picture here. If the price of oil is already low, and Russia needs to sell oil, China ain't no fool. In fact, China's really good at getting what it wants by playing other entities off each other. So even if the price of oil goes back up, everybody knows that Russia needs to sell more, which means that it's a buyer's market, meaning China can go to them and say, hey, we know you hate all those Western European countries because you keep telling everybody you do, so they're not going to be buying as much of your oil, which means you have more, which means we're going to pay a lower price. Oh, the regular price of oil on the open market's $100? We'll give you 80 because we know you need it, Russia, and you need us as an ally because you're pissing everybody else off over on that side of the planet. So again, thinking long-term here, it seems to me that Russia is kind of not painting itself in the corner, but kind of painting itself into one side of the room. And it's not going to be easy to get back over there, even if this Ukrainian mess blows over. So all of that, foreign capital flight, the split with the West, and Putin, meanwhile, is rejuicing the military. So he's preparing for World War III, apparently, and the military did need to be revamped, no question about that. But they're losing money in their economy, and they're spending more money on their military. Okay, this is really, it looks like an old Cold War replay. Your economy is not doing good, and you're sinking billions into your military. Okay, what does the military do for your economy? Nothing. It doesn't generate economic revenue. It doesn't generate long-term economic anything. So they're spending most of their money on something that doesn't have short or long-term return, while they're pissing off everybody in Europe and the United States and saying they never want to deal with them again, while they're losing money on oil. Okay. What are they then not doing in Russia with the money they're now investing in the military? They're not redoing infrastructure. They're not investing in education. They're not investing in their healthcare systems. Now, they might be investing in some of those things, but not nearly as much as they should. So I look at all these things, and I'm puzzled. I'm worried and puzzled of Russia's direction, because they're not investing in themselves. They're investing in a possible war. And what will that war get them? What's it going to get anybody? I don't get it. Their economy's already floundering. Their currency's collapsing. They're investing in the military. Their economy is extremely not diverse, meaning they have this over-reliance on oil and gas. They're not investing in their education or their people to create new industries and jobs and technology. No, they're not doing that. I mean, even if they are, they're not doing as much as they're investing in the military. And you're like, oh, okay, what's the long-term game plan here, fellas? So you have the strongest military on earth again in 5 years. And then what? You keep your fingers crossed that the price of oil keeps going through the roof because you're not doing anything else to invest in your own future. I'm extremely troubled by this, because I give these folks more credit than most in the West do. And I just think that their long-term planning leaves a little bit to be desired. So in summary here, in final, given everything that Russia's doing, I can't see how Russia wins. Putin cannot lose. I can't see how Russia wins long-term this century. Let's pretend everything that Putin wants, or that Russia wants. Shouldn't keep saying Putin. He's the leader. But let's say all of their general strategies that they're investing in and working towards right now, let's say they get them all. Let's say they have the strongest military on planet Earth. They can defend the Russian peoples in various states. Okay? Maybe they even go in and invade all the states that have Russian peoples in them. Sure, I'll give you that. And they'll win those fights. They'll win. Let's pretend they challenge NATO, and NATO fails, and NATO disbands. Okay, let's pretend they get enough European countries on board to follow their model and leave the EU. By the way, Hungary and Greece are ripe for the picking. More on that in another podcast. So let's pretend the NATO goes away, the EU disbands and crashes. Liberal democracy in the West fails because of gridlock or whatever. And Eastern Europe realigns back to Mother Russia. What do you win? What's the prize? Vlad, what have you got at the end of that? You've got a undiverse, floundering economy with no huge investment in the future of the people that are going out and doing anything. So you're not going to have any new great revolutionary breakthroughs in technology or the arts or anything else. You're basically discouraging foreigners from investing there, so you're not going to have any of that money coming in. What is it that they're going to be leading? If they get everything they want right now, what are they going to have in 10 or 20 years? I don't know. I don't get it. I don't see Russia winning in this. Putin won't lose. Russia can't win. And Putin is immortal, we think. So he will exit the stage at some point, and I don't know what's left when he does. A very proud nation that doesn't have a whole lot going on is what it's shaping up to be right this second. Now, whether you believe my analysis or not, that's cool with me. It's just my opinion, peppering in facts about updating you with what's happening in Ukraine, but this is, of course, more about Russia. Putin's Russia does seem to be embracing a strategy of destabilization of the standard Team West liberal democracy of the EU, of NATO, to gain more influence. I actually don't have a problem with that. Big powers want to influence other areas around them for their own security. I get it. But I don't see how it's going to help them in the long term without some significant changes to Russian attitude of their own society. And Vladimir Putin is currently, right this second today, February 17th, hanging out in Hungary. Went to go visit Hungary to cement some business deals with an ally, an ultra-conservative ally who perhaps wants Hungary to turn to Russia. A success! I told you Putin can't lose. And this is part of a bigger picture of other European countries perhaps moving further and further to the conservative right and perhaps even redirecting their attentions to Mother Russia. That's interesting. Should that be the next podcast? Or do you have more questions about this overly long one you just watched today? That's all I got on what is going on in Ukraine and how it relates to Putin's strengths and Russia's weaknesses simultaneously. Hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully I didn't offend any of my Russian friends. It's a great culture. It's a fascinating place. I've been there multiple times. I'm worried about them now. Hit me up if you got questions or comments about this podcast or any other. But for now, as Vladimir Putin would say, party on or else.